Merry Christmas everyone, Venomous Stare back with the Venomous Classic, the series in which I take a look at old StarCraft 2 games that were so good that we had to throw it back and take a look at them. This time we have a matchup from the Wings of Liberty era, 2012, between two of the best players to have ever touched the game, Greg IdrA Fields, the macro machine from America, playing Zerg, and down here in the bottom, the Blue Terran, I am MVP. The four-time GSL winner. The GSL, of course, is the most difficult tournament in the world, held in Korea, and MVP is excellent. He's widely considered to be the player that could plan for best of fives and best of sevens the best. Now, there might have been players that, had better micro or macro, but when it came to winning a best of five and choosing strategies and the sort of builds that you would do against a certain player to exploit their weaknesses or exploit a certain strength of yours or a position on a map, MVP was always the best at doing that. And of course, Greg IdrA Fields, if you don't know who this guy is, he is the anti-hero of StarCraft 2, the bad boy who said whatever was on his mind. Both of these players sort of retired around 2013. IdrA had just played for an extraordinarily long time, of course, and MVP had wrist issues. If you don't know who IdrA is, and you're like, okay, he's the bad boy, what else can you tell me about him? He was basically the best foreigner is a non-Korean, in StarCraft 1, aka Brood War, and I know this is very rudimentary, simple stuff for a lot of you, but you gotta remember, IdrA retired in 2013, so anyone who started playing the game in 2014, 2015, 2016, they might not have even heard of IdrA. They certainly didn't see him streaming StarCraft with his witty one-liners and macro games. So MVP is going to go for a Reactor Hellion opener, it looks like. I have not seen this game. I remember it being very good. Stumbled across the VOD and just said, okay, IdrA and MVP, these guys are legends, this game has to be revisited. So I don't remember exactly what the players do in this specific game. I know in general MVP as a player liked mech quite a bit, and like all phenomenal, truly world-class level Terrans, he wasn't one of these guys that could only play bio or mech. He could do them both very well. And the thing that was great about MVP's mech was he would almost always go for a certain form of harass that would try to catch his opponents off guard, and then he would go into these solid, straight-up tank-based plays. MVP was also a guy who's not afraid to cheese, go for these big busts. Of course, he famously went for a proxy 2 racks, I believe on this very map against Squirtle in the GSL. And actually, this is a very little known fact, IdrA and MVP actually faced off in the GSL round of 16. I'll explain to you how the games went very briefly. MVP took the first game on Blistering Sands with a nice little tank push at the third, and then IdrA was forced to play MVP on one of the worst maps for Zerg in the entire world, Steppes of War. If you've never played Steppes of War, it's the shortest rush distance map in StarCraft 2 history, pretty much. And of course, Zerg wants to be able to sort of take a step back, spread their creep, make a lot of drones, and have an opportunity to see their opponent coming. Well, Steppes of War didn't offer that. It was very, very cramped, and it was considered horrifically bad for Zerg. And IdrA actually won in a macro game. But then they spawned in Close Positions Metalopolis. MVP went for a big multi-racks all-in and did a huge, huge attack with Stem off of multiple barracks with absolutely no plans for future tech. He wanted to go for that big early game push, and that's the sort of thing that MVP was famous for. You see Hellions get surrounded here. MVP, he's going to lose a few of these. This is a big deal as Zerg when you can limit the Hellions, because as soon as you kill a couple and get a few of the others low, it means that you can flood drones. And of course, Hellions, the main thing that you make them for is preventing Zerg from being able to flood drones. And MVP is finally starting to get his micro together. One of the most difficult things to do as Terran is recover micro-wise after you get caught off guard and surrounded with Hellions. Of course, very frequently with Hellions, It's a very numbers-based game. You have to have about 4 or more, and then you have to kite your opponent very fastidiously. So if you get surrounded, not only do you not get those shots off, but you're taking horrific damage. MVP is going to go for a Hellion drop here. This is a great move whenever your opponent knows you're going Hellion and they have their front door walled in with the spine and a couple evos. IdrA already has over 50 drones. MVP is dropping off in the fog of war. Metropolis, which is what this map is called, has a pretty big main, and these are Blue Flame Hellions, so IdrA knows it's a Blue Flame Hellion opener, but he had a lot of lings ready. His lings were not out on the map, out of position. As you can see, MVP tried to swing down to the third base, but because IdrA was playing a very safe, conservative style, the third base was not finished, there were no drones to be picked off, and MVP was not able to do any damage, so IdrA has a lead here. His 1-1 is about to conclude. MVP's armory is on the way. It's going to be full-blown mech for MVP. His third base is over halfway completed, but IdrA's third has finished already, and he can really start to churn out some drones here. He's starting to tech into Infestation Pit, which there are no Cancer Swarm hosts in StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty, AKA's Vanilla StarCraft 2. Of course, MVP is having to research Siege mode. Siege tanks do not come with Siege mode by default. It's very important whenever you're playing against someone who likes to make Blue Flame Hellions and is going for a mech composition. You have to make a couple spines. They're going to try to run these suckers in. And we can see IdrA here has already taken some damage at his third. He's trying to make a spine. He's trying to walk another one down. He does in fact lose that spine as the queen comes up. So MVP is continuing to pressure IdrA. This is the sign of a good player. You always want to be pressuring them and sort of keeping the ball in your court in terms of controlling what's going on, but you always want to be keeping them on the back foot and making them react, because anytime you're forcing someone to react in StarCraft, you're setting them up to make mistakes. Because if you let someone sit back and do whatever they want with StarCraft and you don't mess with them, you're just giving them an engraved invitation to hit their injects, to hit their overlords, to make lots of drones, and that's bad. You want to be forcing someone to make mistakes. IdrA's 2-2 has started. Burrow is on the way. He's up to 77 drones. He has a significant worker lead. MVP, of course, has a relatively delayed third. Whenever you go for a Blue Flame Hellion push like we saw MVP go for and you lose over half of your Hellions, it really guts what you were trying to do and highly limits you. Spire on the way for the macro machine, Greg Idrfields, the American. Now on Metropolis, this map does have islands, but the islands are sort of blocked off by neutral creep tumors that are in the way. So that means that Terran can't just like make an expansion of their base and fly it off super fast. Usually whenever you see island bases, that's generally considered to be Terran favored. +1 is on the way for MVP, but because he went for so many units, of course with that Blue Flame Hellion opener into Blue Flame Hellion drop, it really delayed his upgrades. Roaches are strong against Hellions obviously, but Roaches also get countered by tanks. Without Cyclones and Wings of Liberty, this really made it more simple. You don't have Vipers, you don't have Swarm Hosts. It's the Zerg making a lot of Roaches, trying not to die, teching into Hive, trying to get to Brood Lords. That's how Zergs dealt with mech. Also, there were sometimes Infestors involved, sometimes Hydras involved. But Greg Idrfields is about to have 2-2 here, and he's about to face off against a mech army that's going to be 0-0. 2 Vikings are on the way. This is a great move by MVP. And in Terran versus Zerg in general, you always want to make at least 1 Viking to do that, to harass overlords. It basically forces them to get overlord speed or lose an insane amount of map control. Here we go, Ling's out though, killing the Thor siege tank. You always have to couple your Hellions with your Thor siege tank, and MVP has looked on the back foot all game, as anytime he has mispositioned just a little bit, IdrA has capitalized very well. And I hope you're enjoying this game. If you've been curious as to the absence of my videos, I've been a little bit discouraged with the Anti-Defamation League getting so much power on YouTube and censoring so many videos for no reason, so I haven't been making as much content, but hopefully I'll get back in the swing of things. Of course, follow my Twitch too. Make sure you subscribe, leave a like, rating. Back into the game, we see IdrA's almost maxed. He's at 191 supply. He's making corruptors, and he's intentionally not maxing because you see the production tab. Greater Spire's almost done. As soon as it's done, the corruptors will be finished and he'll be able to make broodlords. Broodlords, of course, cost more supply than corruptors, so you have to have vacant supply. Really big common mistake for Zergs back then was, oh, they'll max on Roach Corruptor, and then as soon as the Greater Spire finishes, they're 200, and they're in this weird position where they have to try to trade off the Roaches. Sometimes players would even go as far as to just killing off throne units so they could quickly make broodlords. It's bad to do this. Of course, you should always just have the foresight to trade off your supply inefficient to supply Roaches. So some Roach Infestors going to move out here, and IdrA is trying to trade off supply, but you're always in this weird spot as Zerg where you need an insane amount of gas to make this money army, and he's splitting up the Roaches here. Infested Terran and Fungal going down. He can't lose the Infestors as there were siege tanks on the high ground, and that makes a lot of difference as IdrA, you can see the supply is plummeting as he's coming back down around the level of MVP. And MVP is in this situation where suddenly he's defending with Hellions, so IdrA is trading pretty well. Now, if you haven't noticed, if you're somehow not familiar with the way this matchup works, anytime that IdrA's trading Roaches for Hellions, that's a good thing. The Hellions do not do very well against just Roaches, but when IdrA is in the fire of Thors and Siege Tanks, and we see a tech-labbed starport, so even Banshees I'm sure will come up at some point, it's bad. So IdrA traded off some supply there. Notice that IdrA is actually down in supply as he's trying to tech to broodlords. And as I said before, this is that weird thing where you're trying to get this super great army, and you really need like 12 gas guys or income or something to get broodlord infestor proper. And this is a very common thing that a lot of Zergs would really run into, where it was like, okay, I really need something to spend my minerals on. And we can see IdrA's making some extra spines, which is helpful, but against mech, you can make an entire forest of spine crawlers, and you know what? All they have to do is siege tanks and scan, and they can blow you away. So here comes the broodlord infestor. IdrA's only at 164 supply. Oh, big fungal there. And this is very big because the fungal was instant and did bonus damage to armored units. It's actually a decent form of anti-air. But MVP was aware of what IdrA was doing. He has a big supply lead actually, and IdrA is in this weird position where there is an insane amount of Vikings, and he didn't really have the gas for a lot of corruptors, and the Vikings are very low, so MVP has to be careful not to get fungled. Lots of broods are out there killing the tanks, each player really taking significant losses here. IdrA is very gas starved. He has to take those extra geysers on his bases, but he's busy fighting. A queen joins the fray, and an insane amount of Vikings are up. 13 Vikings, and they are trying to fight off the broodlords here, but not a lot is available for MVP. Of course, he had to make planetaries on the outer bases. He doesn't have that crazy orbital money. Big fungal coming out there, and that is a big deal because that actually deals decent damage because it deals bonus damage to armored. And here we go, Massling here for IdrA is going to be cleaning up those extraordinarily expensive ground army. The heavy gas base ground army. No Hellions there, of course. Simply put, just the expensive stuff, Thors and siege tanks. And the broodlords are ranging forward here, trying to press forward desperately, but the Vikings are still alive. Now it is worth noting there were no Hellbats, so you did mass Hellions as a mech Terran, but it wasn't as good because the Hellions weren't as good as in a straight up fight, whereas the Hellbats, of course, you could just morph them into Hellbats and they could tank very easily. So IdrA is in this great position now where he sort of made MVP make a bunch of Vikings and then transitioned into Roach laying after killing off all of the unsupported expensive ground army. Now it is worth noting MVP GG's there, and we're going to be moving into Game 2 of this Christmas special Venomous Classic. and we're moving in right here into Daybreak. So I want to talk about, oh, it's not Daybreak, it's Cloud Kingdom. So one of the most important, interesting things about that game was in the Broodlord Infestor era, and in mid-2012 was around when that era began. It wasn't really full Broodlord Infestor though. Zerg's too strong at this time, at all, I would say even, but Zerg players were realizing, okay, roaches aren't really very good unless they're going mech, in which case I'm sort of happy to go roaches. But I'm not really going to waste my time with muted builds. I really want to be going to Infestor with a Ling-based backbone, spend most of my gas on Infestors, and then sort of go from there into Fast Hive. We can see MVP going for proxy racks here, but IdrA's going to scout the proxy racks. So it is very interesting to note that MVP, despite the fact that he was sort of ahead of the meta curve for Broodlord Infestor, this being a mid-2012 game, as IdrA loses a worker there in the barracks finishes, but MVP was forced to retreat, so it's just going to be proxy 1 racks when it was supposed to be 2 racks. So in a way, IdrA snuffs out the cheese, at least initially, because he knows it's coming, and it looks like MVP might just use his intimate map knowledge here to try to find overlords. Now, despite the fact that Broodlord Infestor hadn't become super meta yet, notice that MVP made a bunch of Vikings preemptively. I can't stress how rare and good, how rare this is and how good this makes MVP look, because even at the height of the Broodlord Infestor era, we saw so many Terrans with mid-game armies, Siege Tank, Marine Marauder, and then the Broodlord switch would happen and they would sit there surprised and baffled and act like it was the craziest thing in the world that, oh yes, in fact, Broodlords were coming after I saw a Ling Infestor opener. So the fact that MVP actually went out of his way to make all those Vikings was a big deal. And had he not, you know, I would say that had his opener done a little bit more damage and he was more even keel economically, excuse me, he would have been able to have more support for his ground army, and he wouldn't have lost his ground army. Because really what that game comes down to is MVP has to make mass Viking to deal with the Broodlord transition, and IdrA sees, okay, it's proxy racks, but only 4 Marines and it's a little bit delayed, so I'm going to make Lings here, but I'm not really as worried because IdrA knows if that was proxy 2 racks there would have been more Marines, or the Marines would have showed up sooner. The Marines, they might range out onto the map, but MVP's in this position where he wanted to cheese and he got his hand caught in the cookie jar. On this map, 2 racks, of course 2 racks being the proxy 2 barracks bunker rush, was specifically good because there was this really abusive spot. You see where MVP has these 3 barracks? In that exact spot you could put 3 bunkers, and there was this really popular bunker rush spot against Zerg where you could make that bunker wall them in and kill the natural 100% and really almost always do severe damage into the main that would be game ending. Very frequently with maps what you saw was 2 racks. I'm going to have to get into the meta a little bit here. Reaper Expand wasn't as popular because you had to have a tech lab to build Reapers. So what you saw was more Marine Expand or more 2 racks, which was proxy 2 barracks. And sometimes that would be like full all-in commit with SCV pull. But almost always you would see the SCVs that built the proxy barracks would try to sneak a bunker and bunker rush the Zerg. Well, oftentimes on this map you would see those 3 bunkers get placed right where the 3 barracks are for MVP, of course right at the Zerg's front door, and Zerg can't really surround that with Lings, and there's really no hope of defending it because the SCVs can stand behind it out of range, and without Ravagers existing it's really difficult for Zerg to break out of things like that. And of course drops for overlords were completely different. You had to tech up to lair, you had to get pretty much speed for them to be useful, and then 100 upgrade. Couldn't just get it right out of Evo. Overlords were also slower by default back then, so it was a lot harder being Zerg. And you notice that there's no neutral thing at the base of the ramp like there is now to prevent double bunker blocks. So MVP could have potentially built 2 bunkers at the bottom of IdrA's ramp, or he could have done the 3 bunker block. There were a plethora of lethal early game options here for MVP, so it was very astute of IdrA to do that scouting and scout out MVP in that particular location, because if you were to put a gun to my head and say, hey Wiley, where are the proxies going to be on this map? I would say here, here, and here. So right about where MVP did them, I would say that that's a pretty common proxy spot, but that's a conservative proxy spot. I would say that foreign players would be more prone to proxy them around the Zerg's 3rd base. But we're going to see a Marine tank push here for MVP. This is your straight up, very strong 2-base Marine tank push. He's going to paddle around here before stim or +1 gets done. Notice that he also delayed his medevacs. So this is pretty damn committed, and something that you saw quite a bit in Wings of Liberty, because back in Camp IdrA we don't really see much of anything. Lair just finished, so he's not going to have Spire. His 1-1 has yet to complete. Does he have Bane speed? Hell no. So there's not a lot of choices here for Zerg. Roaches weren't popular at all. This timing hits pre and Fester. So MVP, of course, ranges out here, sees that there's no 3rd. Had there been a 3rd, he would have butchered it. And he has combat shields, no stim though. So he has to be careful, because this is very threatening, but he is sacrificing stuff here to get this scary amount of units out in this composition. No stim, no medevacs. And of course he delayed his upgrades. +1 is on its way here. But just like last game, IdrA went for early double upgrades, and MVP only has the 1 upgrading facility. Last game Armory, of course, because he went back this game. And here's why these pushes sort of fell out of style. The Zerg massed up a ton of units. IdrA surrounds everything. Looks like he's going to clean this up, and he does, as MVP plummets to 78 supply. He has a wall in, he has tanks behind the wall in, so he's not dead. IdrA, of course, moves out to take his 3rd behind that push being crushed. So that's why the meta sort of evolved away from pushes like that and towards pushes where you moved out once you got medevacs. So in StarCraft, how you spend your gas is very important, and it can dictate what units you have and don't have. So there are a ton of different Zerg versus Terran variations of those sort of mid-game pushes that you can do. You know, 5 racks with Marauders and slow, 3 racks with stim pack, 3 racks with combat shield, 3 racks with a couple tanks, 3 racks, you know, with medevacs, 5 racks with +1/+1 in combat shields. That's what's so brilliant about StarCraft, is there really are a plethora of options that you can choose from, and that's what makes scouting important and what makes being able to give information away and try to deceive people so great. Well, in this instance, MVP delayed his 3rd, delayed his upgrades, and delayed his starport to go for a push that involved having a lot of Marines with combat shields and 2 tanks. This meant that had IdrA played a normal, I'm going to take a 3rd as fast as possible type Zerg style, 3rd would have been crushed. Maybe IdrA would have been tempted to try to hold it and would have lost off of the back of that. However, as it stands, IdrA was playing really careful. He went out of his way to scout for proxies in the early game and delay his 3rd. And what do you know, he read MVP like a book. MVP, the player who is notorious for planning series very well. And IdrA has been on top of it this game. He already has his infestors out here. His 2-2 is almost done. Of course, MVP's 2-2 is a little bit behind. And IdrA is starting to spread creep into the middle of this map. Cloud Kingdom has a ton of hills. This map was always very annoying for me to spread creep on. Creep, of course, you couldn't build creep tumors on ramps back in this day, so you always had to have overlords like at the top. It was very, very annoying, especially because back then I was very bad at the game. Lots of tanks are out here for MVP, and this is one of these situations where a lot of people have forgotten this. Oh, big Ling run by. Is MVP going to raise his wall up? As he doesn't even have a wall. Holy crap, it's just 2 depots. And IdrA's going to get into the main here, and MVP is forced to pull back. MVP at 126 to play. Let's keep an eye on that. And he wasn't completely moved out, so I don't think he lost a ton. But that's one of those little run-ins. As we see, 14 workers died, so that was actually quite a bit. When you consider, I would say that the main strength of that push was that he brought MVP's entire army back, and now he knows where the army is and can move around the map safely. And what did he do that for? Just mineral lings. And now he knows exactly where MVP is. He has a chance to continue to mass up. His 3-3's on the way. His hive tech is here, obviously, since he has 3-3 on the way. Greater Spire is here. And Terran's, I think, as we see a burrowed ling at MVP's third, this is just brilliant from IdrA. This is the sort of top-tier macro play that people love him for. And MVP is going to siege up. And this is what I keep trying to say, is Terran players forget how strong once tanks are. Once you get about 6 of them, it almost becomes this untenable position. But IdrA's going to counterattack here, and this is what happens when you sort of dilly-dally a little bit. And a fungal is going to go off onto the few amount of units, and mass ling being used here at the front door of MVP. MVP still no wall in, and IdrA is going to throw out Infested Terran. He's going to bring back his Windfesters, and with Siege Tank Marine pushing forward here, it's going to be a little bit of a base trade. And MVP is right at IdrA's front door. He's going to bring back a lot of links here, as it looks like he might be scared. Fungal onto those tanks. IdrA, he's trying to make Broodlords, but one of the most dangerous times is Zerg is trying to tech into Broodlords when Terran is attacking you. MVP knows this. He's going to stem forward, but big Fungal, as the Fungal was instant back then and very powerful, and you can see when the Fungal is not a projectile and does bonus damage to armored units, it really does a number. And those were just Marines, so I think even, you know, 2017 Fungal would have been nice. But MVP is forced to pick up, and this is one of those situations where, oh, you got big balls and did a base trade, and you suddenly think like, oh, well, maybe I'm ahead, but actually the opponent just has a base in the corner that you don't know about. MVP is at 88 supply, but he's in this weird position where he only has 26 workers. He can try to mule hammer, you know, that's something you have as Terran, but IdrA is aware that he's going to be trying to do this. Notice that because IdrA had that burrowed ling there, that delayed the third. That's night and day difference. If Terran had that third that whole time with mules mining, forget about it. IdrA's suddenly in this position where a whole nother Terran army is up his ass after that big attack and base trade. But now MVP's in a situation where he's pretty much flatlining, and the American macro machine has him on the back foot. IdrA has Broodlords out here. Notice he's already making Corruptors. He's trying to take more gas, which is what you need. And he hasn't retaken his third or fourth. He's very committed to ending this now. And siege tanks that are sieged are really bad against Broodlords. And we can see that IdrA, oh, he gets a fungal off there, nice, and he's going to run the Broodlords back. You always want to just keep running Broods back. Play very, very defensive, and let the opponents try to fight into fungal, especially instant fungal, and throw out Infested Terrans, and IdrA takes it 2-0. So here we have two of the legends of StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty face off. Both of these guys were god tier and really had a huge impact on the first 2 years of the game's life. Make sure you subscribe and comment for more.